Hi, everybody. It's Miss Amy, and I am here with Chapter 3 of Lynn Reed Banks, The Return of the Indian, the sequel to The Indian in the Cupboard. And Chapter 3 is called The Way It Began. Now, boys and girls, just remember, Miss Amy does not own the rights to this book. She just owns the book, and she's glad she gets to share it with you. So yesterday when we left reading, Omri got some good news. He had wrote a story about Little Bear and Boone and his experience with them as a make-believe creative writing story, and he won. He was going to get 300 pounds, and he was just so excited, and he was getting his manuscript ready, and his parents didn't even know he did it. And so there's something good happening in Omri's life, which makes me really happy because this move or Patrick's move or whatever went on obviously wasn't good. And having to give up Little Bear and Boone had to have left a big sad scar on him. So let's go ahead and crack the spine of this book and let's go ahead and read chapter 3, The Way It Began. Omri was rather a private person. At least, he needed to be alone quite a bit of the time. So his room, which was right up under the eaves of the house, was perfect for him. Sounds like his room was kind of in the attic, maybe, huh? In the old house, his bedroom had been just one of several opening off the upstairs landing, and at a certain times of the day had been like a railway station. His new room was off the beaten track. No one, in his opinion, had any reason to come up here or even pass the door. There were times now that he had it all arranged to suit himself. When he forgot about how awful it was living in Hovel Road, when it seemed worth anything to have a room like this. It wasn't a very large room, so his father had built a shelf high up under the skylight for him to sleep on. Sounds a little scary to me, but then again, I probably weigh a lot more than Omri. This was great because he could look up at the night sky. Under his bed shelf were his desk and more shelves for the collections of old bottles, key rings, and wooden animals. He's a little pack rat. No, it sounds like he's still collecting, doesn't it, boys and girls? I think I would enjoy laying under the night sky. It sounds a little more like one of the modern day bunk beds that we see a lot, so maybe it wasn't that frightening. The wall opposite the window was covered with his posters, a mixture of old and new, from Snoopy and an early Beatles to the Police, and a funny one about a flasher who gets caught in an elevator. In pride of place were two large photographs of Iroquois chieftains that he'd found in magazines. Neither of these Indians looked remotely like Little Bear, but they appealed to Omri just the same. His clothes were stored on the landing, so this room wasn't cluttered up with them. That left quite a lot of space for his beanbag seats, a low table. He'd sawed its legs to half their length after seeing a photo of a Japanese room, his cassette radio, and his most recent acquisition, an old chest. A cassette radio, by the way, boys and girls, is a radio that plays tapes, which came out before CDs, which came out before Pandora and iTunes. He'd found this in the local market, coated with dirt and grease. Bought it for £2 after bargaining and borrowed a cart from the market man to drag it around the corner to Hovel Road. He'd cleaned it with a scraper and some sandpaper out in the garden before hauling it up to his room. It had come up a treat, just as the man in the market had promised. The wood was oak, the hinges iron, and it had a brass plate on it with the name of its first owner. Omri had hardly been able to believe it when he had removed the layers of dirt from the plate and read the name for the first time. It was L. Bear. L. Bear. Little Bear? Of course it was pure coincidence, but as Omri thought, if I were superstitious, he shined the brass every week. Somehow it, too, made him feel closer to Little Bear. The chest was not only interesting and beautiful, but useful. Omri used it for storage. There was only one thing wrong with it. It had a lock, but no key. So he piled cushions and other objects on it and pretended it was a bench. That way, nobody who happened to be prying about in his room, it still happened occasionally, mothers cleaning and brothers poking about, borrowing, would realize that it contained a number of interesting and private objects. Omri knelt by the chest now and shifted to the floor a pile of cassettes. A bull worker, he was bent on developing his muscles. Some cushions and 3 copies of Mad Magazine. Mad Magazine was like a comic book back in the day. Among older bits of junk, then he opened the lid of the chest. Now, Mad Magazine might still be around. I don't know. It too was untidy, but Omri knew where to borrow. On their way down the left-hand side to search of the folder containing his prize-winning story. He put it in a chest? That just doesn't sound very responsible to me for something that he put so much time into. Sounds like it would, fold up or something on it. I don't know. My hairs really bother me. I'm sorry, boys and girls. Then, carefully, he moved some other things which were in the way and eased this metal object out. It was a small white cabinet with a mirror in its door and a keyhole, an old-fashioned bathroom venison cupboard, in fact. He stood it on the Japanese table. The door swung open, apart from a single shelf. It was quite empty as it had been when he'd first received it. A rather odd birthday present from Gillian, just over a year ago. Omri sat back on his heels, staring at it. How clearly it all came back. The cupboard, the strange little key, which had been his great-grandmother's, and which had mysteriously fitted the commonplace lock and turned this ordinary little box into a time machine with a difference. Put any plastic object, an axe, an Indian teepee, a quiver of arrows, into it. Close the door, turn the key. Miss Amy lost her place. And those things became real, miniature, but real. Real leather, real cloth, real steel. Put the plastic figures of human beings or animals inside, and in the time it took to lock them in, they too became real and alive. And not just living toys, but people from another time, from their own lives, with their own personalities and needs and demands. Oh, you remember Little Bear was quite demanding. Oh, it hadn't been all fun and games, as Omri had naively expected at first. Little Bear was no toy to submit tamely to being played with. He was, for all his tiny stature, a ferocious savage, warlike, and domineering. Omri had soon realized that if any grown-ups found out about the cabinet's magic properties, they would take it, and the Indian and everything else away. So Omri had to keep it secret and look after, feed, and protect his Indian as best he could. And when Patrick had found out the secret had sneaked a Texas cowboy into the cupboard so that he too could have a little person, the trouble really started. Yes, it did. Little Bear and Boone were natural enemies. They came close to killing each other several times. Even their respective ponies had caused endless difficulties. And then Adiel had taken the cupboard one day. The key had fallen out of the lock and been lost. And Omri, Patrick, and the two little men had been faced with the dire possibility that the magic was dead. And these minute and helpless people would have to remain in Omri's time, his giant world, and in his care forever. That's kind of a summary of the last book. So if you didn't listen to my advice in chapter 1, you might be a little bit more caught up. When they'd reopened the cupboard door, there were the two groups, Little Bear and the wife. Omri had found him, Bright Stars, sitting on Little Bear's pony, and Boo-hoo Boone on his white horse. Only now they were plastic again. Patrick had taken Boone and put him in his pocket, and Omri had kept the Indians. He had them still. He had packed them in a little wooden box, which he kept safely at the very bottom of the chest. Actually, it was a box within a box within a box. Each was tied tightly with string. There was a reason for all this. Omri had wanted to make them difficult to get at. He had always known that he would be tempted to put Little Bear and Bright Stars into the cupboard again and bring them back to life. His curiosity about how they were getting on, that alone tormented him every day. They had lived in dangerous times, times of war between tribes, wars aided and encouraged by Frenchmen and Englishmen who were fighting on American soil in those far-off days. Boone's time, the time of the pioneering of Texas. 100 years after Little Bear's era was dangerous too. You see, Little Bear and Boone weren't even from the same time. And so all three, Omri, Little Bear, and Boone, were all from different times. That had to have been interesting, don't you think? And there'd been another little man, Tommy, the British medical orderly from the First World War. They'd magicked him to life to help when Little Bear was kicked by his horse. When Boone was dying of an arrow wound, Tommy might still be alive in Omri's world, but he would be terribly old, about 90 by now. By putting their plastic figures into the magic cupboard, by turning the magic key, Omri had the power to recall them to life, to youth. He could snatch them from the past. The whole business nearly blew Omri's mind every time he thought at all deeply about it. So he tried not to think about it too much, and to prevent his yielding to temptation. He had given his mother the key. She wore it around her neck on a chain. It was quite decorative. People often asked her about it, and she would say, "It's Omri's, really, but he lends it to me." That wasn't the whole truth. Omri had pressed it on her and begged her to keep it safe from him. Safe. Not just from getting lost again, but safe from him, from his longing to use it again, to reactivate the magic, to bring back his friends, to bring back the time when he had been not happiest, but most intensely, dangerously alive himself. Boys and girls, that ends chapter 3 of The Return of the Indian. All this time, he's looking back, and he's not happy, boys and girls. He's happy about his current accomplishment about the book, but he's really been sad, and I think he's really missing Little Bear and Bright Stars and the memories that he has with them. So what do you think's going to happen next, boys and girls? I guess we'll have to wait and find out when we read chapter 4 tomorrow of The Return of the Indian. Thank you so much, boys and girls, for watching and listening to me. And if you're watching this before bedtime, good night and sleep tight.